Washington State University. Go Cougs!
Sensor types. Given all of this, what's available? What are the tools we have to be able to pull in data, to build our models, to drive them forward, to support all kinds of generative technology activities? This is an abbreviated list. It's a high-level list. There are entire journals dedicated to sensors. IEEE has several major journals there's one that's just called Sensors. And it's been around for a very long time, and there's amazingly cool things in there, but it's not just new technologies, it's the evaluation of the prior ones to say how good they are, what works and when. It's a huge field, but this is a high-level view. So knowing that this major categories exist is what we're hoping for you to have. Our primary one, passive infrared motion detectors. They're looking at heat across two different sensors to say when there's a difference between the two or a change in the difference, and they fire, and they say on. They're called motion detectors, but they're just sensing heat. Cameras, huge field. The ability to use a high-fidelity sensor like a camera has distinct advantages, and we'll talk about advantages and disadvantages shortly. Microphones, auditory systems. Historically, this was a tough field, but at this point, if you want to talk about natural language processing with the Alexa development kit, the Google Home, Cortana, Siri, there's a whole bunch of fields. If you can interact with a device vocally, I'm sure we can pull out more information than Amazon and Google has tried to do in their API so far. There's much more you can get about stress and needs and behavior and patterns that indicate someone's health. How bright rooms are, light level sensing, power metering, what devices are in use, how much are they using? Water sensing, are they taking showers, are they taking baths, are they washing dishes? The use of water is very important to humans. Pressure sensors, are they on the floor, are they in a bed, are they sitting in a chair? We have one in the smart apartment where you sit down in a chair and it says occupied, because someone's sitting in the chair. Humans are a sensor source. You can ask them questions. Say, hey, what time did you wake up? I don't remember. Okay, what time did you have breakfast? I don't know, after I woke up. They can report, they can tell you data. It's not always very good, but it's there. You can ask them questions, especially when you have caregivers involved. Caregivers can answer questions about the people they take care of. Electromagnetic fields, there's a huge set of options there. Our life is surrounded by EM fields now. Where devices are, humans even deflect EM. The YC project does things like gesture recognition by waving hands, and it's using antennas in the walls of the room to tell where you are and what gestures you're making. There's a lot of choices there. Accelerometers to know when things are moving and shaking. GPS, where you are on the globe. Open and close sensors, contact switches, chemical things for air and food and toileting and all kinds of stuff. If you go look at Toto toilets, they have a wide range of toilets that do chemical composition on the things you deliver, and will generate spreadsheets and send them to your doctor for you. But it's a great indicator of health. It's just, an interesting one. And I added LiDAR this year because they've now gotten inexpensive enough. They're doing range finding, and they build maps of three-dimensional spaces around it. And the robotics people should be going, yeah, LiDAR. And I feel given the price point of LiDAR and the new solid-state stuff, it should be something we consider. Because it's reached the point where we can do a single sensor in the corner of the room and build a model of where people are instead of using the motion detectors like we do. It's an alternative these days. So I have just a few of these that I like to talk about, kind of what they're good for and why, because every sensor you can sit down and do this. What are they good for? What will they tell you? We love to know about patterns of activity, so having several motion detectors will give you that pattern of activity. One won't. Well, one kind of does, because it can kind of watch your on-off jitter, but it's really low fidelity. You want them throughout the house to say, okay, they walked this way, and then they came back this way, and then they were here for a while, and then they went to this room. And that pattern can indicate activity detection. We can do identification based on how your patterns look. This is the field of behaviometrics, which is able to give you distributions of likely identities based on behavior. I saw one recently doing fraud detection by tracking mice movements. So how you move the mouse while you're doing things on your computer is indicative of your identity with 95% accuracy on a relatively large sample set. So if you can watch how someone's using the mouse, you can know who they are. And so when they're then trying to spend money to buy tickets to Abu Dhabi or buy me that new Rolex that I've always wanted on my credit card, you can say, he doesn't use a mouse like that, and try and help with fraud detection. Things like mobility, how much they move around the home, where they are. Can we use this to do medicine detection? I just say no, because it's so low fidelity, I can't tell if you're taking the medicine. I can't tell if you're putting it in your mouth. I can't tell if you're interacting with devices or with the pills in the pill system. We can say if there's an absence of movement at a place that's not supposed to happen. You go to the middle of the hallway and you stay there for 3 hours, it's probably an issue. A caregiver should be noted, but it's not the same as knowing, did you fall? How hard did you fall? Was there body injury? It doesn't give you that. It's just kind of an absence of mobility. No biostatus and very little context information. It doesn't tell you about the world around the person. Light sensors, we want to know how many photons are coming in, because that's what we're measuring. It can give you some things about what they want, mostly preferences during activities. So if you know they're cooking, how bright is the room? If you know they're sleeping at night, how bright is the room? Kind of contextual information. That's why it's all about context. Door boards, contact switches. What are people interacting with? What doors are opening and closing? What things are coming and going? You can do this by tracking items. And to some extent, the context. They're commonly used in medicine environments to say which doors are opening on their pills, because they're little contact switches. But it still doesn't tell you if they've actually taken it. They just know you've opened the door on the little pill bottle. Is that good enough to know they've taken their pills? It's indicative that they may have taken their pills. They're at least thinking about the fact they should be taking their pills. Can't really say they did it. RFID kinds of things. We can track what objects you're interacting with. We can say which ones you like in a pattern of behavior. We can also just track RFID on you. We can say mobility by saying which doors, put sensors at each door and track you walking around the house. They track pill bottles with this, and then also context. What objects are you nearby? Because we can track your location. Accelerometers. It's the A part in F equals MA, and there's a sensor for this. They usually give us both X, Y, and Z and yaw, pitch, and roll, depending on how much you spend on your sensor, but the difference is about 30 cents, so go for it. And they're great for on-body tracking. So our project's up in Spokane at St. Luke's. It's all about using accelerometers to interpret body movements and how people are moving around. It can be used on items. It can be used all throughout the home to some extent. But that's our big one, is we put it on the person and we track it. Cool part about things like Fitbits and cell phones, they have accelerometers. That's how Fitbit works. It's using an accelerometer to say, look, I'm shaking back and forth. And they interpret it to say, is that a step? Have you ever figured out how they tell if you go up and down stairs? Because my Fitbit will say, let's see how many I'm up to here. 6 sets of stairs today. Yeah, I'm really crooking now. How do they do that? They can tell that overall it was going in an upward direction for a certain amount of distance and time to count that as a set of stairs. And they can tell when you're going too fast. So in an airplane, when you take off, I have my Fitbit on. Well, guess what? It says I didn't go up any stairs, even though I gained 36,000 feet. And the answer is they can tell how quickly you go up. Have you ever tried it in an elevator? If you get in an elevator and go up one story, and you kind of walk while you do it, your Fitbit will give you one set of stairs. Because it's going slow enough and up one flight that it will give you a flight of stairs. What happens if you go to Webster and you go up 12 stories? Well, turns out it'll give you steps. It'll give you about one to maybe two, even possibly 3 stories. I've tried this. And after that, the elevator accelerates too much, and their algorithm says, no, you're in some kind of mechanical assist. You don't get those stories, even though you're standing there running like this. Yeah, it doesn't work because they've put a filter on it to determine that in context you're going too quickly. The only elevator I've found so far that you can always get steps is Sloan. You can go 5 stories if you just stand there and walk. It's so slow that they can't tell the difference. So, just letting you know, if you want to cheat on Fitbit for stair climbing, Sloan's your solution. Yes?
What about just like hills? Does it count it as a
Yes, because they can't tell the difference between the steps, because they don't kind of go junk, 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 junk. They just say, all right, your altitude is going up. When it's not altitude, your acceleration seems to be against gravity with a velocity that's against gravity at some angle as well as some amount of time. Therefore, that's a step. And you'll notice I start getting very pedantic when I talk about sensors because you have to be. You have to know what it really, truly means. One of our favorite false positive situations was in 206 up here in the lab. We had a motion detector. This is relatively early on. It was the old wired system that would sit there and it would just turn on and off sometimes. On, off, on, off, on, off. And it would do it at random times for varying amounts of times. We couldn't figure it out. What was going on? And one day I was sitting in my cubicle up there and I was watching the data live because I was working on the system. And all of a sudden it started blinking on and off. I'm watching the data. I'm going, there it is. It's doing it. So I leap out of my chair, whip around the corner, look below the sensor. You know what's there? Laser printer. When the paper comes out, it comes out hot. And all it's detecting is heat. Every single page that came out of that printer made our sensor turn on once. So we could use our sensor to get a page count of how much was being printed on that printer. So that was lovely. Is knowing what really is going on is a big deal. Things like cameras. Cameras are getting easier to use. I say olden times, that was 10 years ago when we first looked at this system. Doing vision processing was a wild and gnarly world. These days, it's gotten really pretty good. The OpenCV libraries, the Connect libraries, the ability to interpret things very quickly, it's gotten great. The cameras themselves have gotten smaller, they've gotten cheaper, they've gotten more accurate, they've gotten higher resolution. Everything is wonderful about cameras, except people don't like them in their house for various reasons. And they're all good reasons. So it's a tough one. If you want to use a camera, you better have a good way to make the sale, because the sociological research based around privacy and acceptance with sensors is that the perceived benefit from the sensing needs to be high enough to balance against the perceived privacy intrusion. So when I say I want a motion detector in your home and I say look at the data, it says on and off, people go, go for it. The intrusion is tiny, the perceived benefit is high enough. You say I want to put a camera, they go, whoa now, this had better be really good. What's your sale? And so despite the fact that we can do all kinds of interpretation and understand what's going on in an image, it's difficult to actually get the data sometimes. And so there's some really cool vision processing stuff going on. It's just not always useful. So, biostatus sensors. This is not something that we build on our own, but we've used some here more in recent years, especially when you can just pick it up with a Fitbit, or does the Apple Watch do that kind of stuff? It gives you heart rate at the very least. You can now get smart watches that'll give you EEG stuff. They'll give you O2 sats. They've got some that do blood glucose for diabetes issues. These are cool wearables, and they give you all kinds of great stuff. One of my favorites out here is the whole world of contact lens-based ones. That's a pretty old school one that Sony put out. There's some new ones that have cameras. Yeah. Camera in your contact lens, powered by blinks. When you blink, it recharges the little capacitor on board. When you have enough juice, you can take a photo. Oh, the future's getting interesting. But this is all part of it. This particular one was doing glucose sensing, because eyes actually give you a very easy way to do glucose sensing without actually getting into the blood. And so it's a really big advantage without actually worrying on the skin, because a lot of the wearables actually worry on your skin to get to take samples. It hurts. Power metering. We love power metering. If you can tell what's on and off in the home, you can tell what people are doing to a pretty good sense. Are they watching TV? Are they cooking? Are they cleaning? Are they eating? What is it they're doing? Power metering is a big part of that. Knowing whether you're doing it per device or whole home or have a statistical distribution. This guy right here, Swetek Patel, has some really cool tech to help you just do whole home monitoring with a single thing. Their new one just magnets onto the circuit panel. You don't even have to wire it in. You just take it and you go clunk and then turn it on. And they start learning the devices in your home based on that. It is really neat. And there's plenty of other options, plenty of other tools. And so if you're interested in being someone who's a key member of a research team, being able to contribute to the discussion of what sensors you should use and why, it's a really good skill to have. You don't necessarily have to be the one to code it, to sit down and actually build the thing. You can always hire someone to build the thing. But knowing what sensors you're going to use and why, what are they going to tell you, and how will that contribute to the model you're going to build and the conclusions you'll be able to derive. Unless you know about your sensor sources, you can't build systems. And so I encourage you to continue to look into this. And something that's also under there, if you pick the right sensor, it will almost always outdo your ability to interpret data from other sources. Pick the right one, use the right one, know what you're trying to sense, and pick the right tool. If you pick a different one and have to do transfer learning and filtering and building models just to then feed your main model, there's all this additional layers of error. Just pick the right one. And something that's always on top of this, the cost, the range, what can it pick up? That's a big deal for us because we like to deploy lots of sensors. How much it's going to cost is a big part of that. If they're $1,000 each, that's spendy. If they're $5 each, now we can talk. Finding the right choice is important. And then also privacy and perception. What are people going to be willing to accept? What will they perceive about it? How will their friends perceive it? Because if I have sensors all throughout my home and someone comes in, what are they going to think's going on? Do my friends see it as a enabler for me, or a huge privacy concern for them when they're in my home? Or is it something that actually is detrimental? It shows that I, as a senior, this big clunky thing I have to wear that's helping me stay alive, is it a point of weakness? And that perception is all part of the nature of the people we'll be serving with these technologies. There's a lot of work on sensor placement. Where do we put them? Why do we put them there? The best solution is always saturation, because if you can just add more, life's good. It's expensive, it's visible, it's harder, it's easier to maintain, because if some burn out, you don't care. But the trade-off is it's expensive, big time expensive. Ideally, things like minimum total coverage. How do we make sure we sense everything with the minimum number of sensors? That's always kind of nice, but it requires a variety of algorithms and careful placement. We've kind of slipped down into the world of targeting, where we just pick the few things that are most indicative of what the senior needs and what the models need, and we target those. And so, for example, things like saturation, little tiny sensors, grains of rice size sensors. Throw them out of a truck, sense the whole space. Military loves this one. All right, let's fly a plane over a forest, and we'll just shovel sensors out the back of the airplane. They'll make a giant mesh network, and then we'll be able to tell where everyone is as they walk through that entire space. It's only good for a week, because then the sensors run out of juice. But we don't care. this is where the battle is now, and we'll just sense it now. Boom, done. And saturate it, you're good to go. Get lots of data, you get a lot of resiliency in the face of damage. I mean, I can imagine the opposite side going out there with a vacuum cleaner and vacuuming up your sensors. It's a new kind of minefield. But big parts, can you do it? You know, how expensive is it? How long does it last? For a long time, we did minimum total coverage with our layouts. When you see our old designs, there will be lots of sensors, and they're all targeting the space in such a way you get a full coverage, you see everywhere. But what we discovered is that while this is great for mobility tracking and for my work on identifying people, because I really know where you are at all times, or at least close to it, it's still pretty expensive. It's a lot of sensors. Kyoto's got about 60 motion detectors now. And that's a lot of devices to put in a home. So for a commercial product or a real world kind of solution, it's not necessarily what you need. What we've slipped onto at this point is we care most about the activities that people are doing and a general sense of where they are, not a very specific one. So our new setup, and this is a terrible scan, but you'll see that the sensors are just kind of placed around the home in certain key locations. So we can tell when someone interacts with a given thing, a certain chair or the refrigerator or goes to the bathroom and sits on the toilet. Those are the key points during activities for the most important activities. And now we can get the home from 60 sensors down to 20, which is a significant reduction. And so by targeting the individual things that you care the most, you can get just what you need with the least number of sensors, the easiest to install, and the least expensive. On-body placement, because when we talk about homes, it's where it goes in the room and what item it's on. When on a person, where does it need to be? And you'll see in a lot of the work, things like, should it go down on the ends of their shanks, their shins? Should it go at the core? Should it go on forearms? Because forearms are great for gestures and reaching, but they're not so good at walking, because you want to know about how I'm actually moving. That's much more the lower and core body. So where you put it on the body matters a lot. And also, if you're trying to use this to measure the world around them, if you only put it on my front, can you tell what's behind me? Probably not. You need to know what you're trying to sense and where you want to look off of the body as well. So when we talk about in rooms, the major options. Do we put them on the floors? Do we put them on the walls? Do we go on the ceilings? Do we put them on the objects? Do we put them on the people? The answer is yes. They all have advantages. They all have their negatives. The cool part about ceilings, and why much of our work goes on ceilings, is because people can't run into them very easily. They don't bump into the sensors. The sensors are out of the way. They're low visibility. They're also hard to occlude, because if it's on the wall and there's, I put a big box on the floor because I got a shipment of some sort, and I stand here, you can't see me anymore. It's occluded because of the angle. Whereas if it's over on the ceiling, I have to crawl under something for you to not be able to see me on the sensor grid. So it's hard to escape it when you put it up high. Whereas on the walls, it's easier to install. Putting things on ceilings, you have to go up and down ladders. And for seniors and family members, that's much more difficult. And with our Smart Home in a Box study, we found that many people had a lot of trouble with ceiling mounts. And so we started doing more and more on the walls, because it's good enough, usually, and that'll do. You have to make the trade-off. If you like to put them on objects, it's great if it changes the behavior of the object. Well, actually, no, it's great if it doesn't change the behavior of the object. So for example, we put an accelerometer on a pill bottle. Well, if it makes it so the pill bottle's too big to hold on to get the cap off, we can tell you're trying to get the cap off, but you can't do it anymore. And so in that case, our sensor has changed the nature of the thing we're sensing, and it's not a very good sensor. But we can really tell you're interacting with key items. And so what you'll find is in our SHIB systems, when you look at the data, you'll see that everything's named after what room it's in and what number of room it is. So if they have two kitchens, there'll be kitchen A and kitchen B. More often it's bedroom A, bedroom B, bedroom C kind of thing. And then what the individual little target is inside that room. Is it pointed at the bed? Is it pointed at a chair? Is it pointed at the refrigerator? So it'll be kitchen A, refrigerator A. And so you know which room and what object. And so all our naming scheme is designed to let you know, not only is this a piece of data, but what does it tell you about the world? And so we put them all throughout the home. We do some very interesting environmental tweaks. We used to try to measure things very directly, but we've discovered a few things don't need direct measuring. We put temperature sensors over stoves. So instead of putting a current monitor on the stove and having to wire and get an electrician in, we just put a temperature sensor over it. What happens when you use the stove? What's the primary purpose of a stove? To make things hot. And so it gives off a bunch of entropy. A temperature sensor measures entropy, and so the temperature will go up, and you will watch all of the sensors through the house. The temperature sensors all over will just kind of truck along, and all of a sudden the one over the stove will go way up, and then it'll come back down. You go, aha, someone cooked. So we don't need to know that they used electricity. We don't need to know that they turned the dials and did things with the stove. We just know that it happened, and that's enough. Similarly for showers. We put a sensor outside the shower, unless you take a really cold one, makes a bunch of heat, and we can see it. We don't have to put things on pipes and measure pipes and all that stuff, which is troublesome. Something that we do is we divide the space up because we care about mobility and where people are. Motion detectors can tell us if someone passed through an area but not which way they went. So you kind of have to look at 2 or 3 sensors in a row to figure out directions of travel. And you'll find that the way we place sensors around the home are designed to chop them into pieces, even inside doors, so that you can tell whether someone's in individual rooms. And so by putting things in certain places, it tells us more about how the space is being used, even though they aren't individually tracking the person in like XY coordinates. So we can learn a lot just by placement. And then also area sensors versus objects. We put one over the bed to say, is someone in the bed? Or at least at the bed? And if they happen to be at the bed for many hours, they're probably in bed sleeping or lying there at the very least. Versus one that uses a whole area just to say, is a room occupied? The problem with motion sensors is they just say on and off. We don't know in this living room, unless they happen to be in this chair under this sensor or in this chair at that chair, the area just says someone's here. They could be in any of this space. But that's usually good enough. They're doing living room-like activities. And based on all of this, you'll see that we use that information to build our model, our activity learners, our activity recognizers, activity discovering. And we use temporal data, so when people are doing things. We use where they are throughout the home. We give you specific items they're interacting with. There's the context, the temperature in the house, how bright it is, are there other people around. We divide the space up to tell you individual rooms, and also a certain amount of when people come and go, so that we know if they're home or not. And all of that together helps build that model, because it's all valuable information. Now, there's a lot of other concepts and ideas that go along with this. I'm mostly focused on why we use sensors, what they tell you, to some extent, what are the errors you should be aware of and the issues you can have, and then a variety of the sensors that are available to build these kinds of tools and systems we use in generative technology. But this is our view and our perspective, but there are a lot of other choices out there. The data itself is very simple from most of our system. This doesn't have our accelerometers in it, but most of them just say what day something happened, what time it happened, what device it was, and a message. And the messages are very simple. Motion detectors say on and off. Light level sensors say 100 or 10 or 50. It's just a percentage of brightness. Doors go open and close. And temperature sensors give you a temperature. What do you think this is? 29. 29 what? It's in Celsius. We've done everything we can to keep things in SI units because the requirement for publishing in international journals is everything's in SI units. So we just keep it easy. Just warning you. You'll see a number like 29, you're like, boy, is that Fahrenheit or Celsius? The answer is Celsius. Just to remind you, when you see the data coming in from smartphones, they've got a lot of sensors. We are now doing a lot more work of this, mostly thanks to Dr. Miner over here. He's built quite a bit based around smartphones and pulling the data in. And things like Apple Watches are just smartphones that are small, more than anything else. And they really do have where you are, what you can hear, what you can see, your interaction with the screen, how much it's shaking and moving and rotating. It's telling us what EM signals on various protocols it's seeing. It can get magnetometer to tell you which way is north or other magnetic fields around it. And give you the FM receiver. It's hiding in there. They all have one legally. It has to be there. Most of them aren't enabled though. So, oh well. My phone, I love it. I just fire that sucker up. Give me some NPR. And but you can use that to see what radio stations are out there. You can tell what the battery is doing. There's more. Some of them have barometric pressure sensors, NFC, near range, RFID kinds of sensing. There's a lot of tools you can pull out of a single smartphone. And so you are carrying around an amazing sensor package for people to tell what you're doing at all times and where you're doing it. Just warning you. So, but some issues. It's mobile, so you don't necessarily know what the context is. Cool part about sensors in a home, they're fixed. You know where they are. You know what room they're in. You know what they're telling you. Mobile phones, you have to build that up to a certain extent to know what's going on around it. You got to keep the battery charged, especially modern ones. They last a few days at most. It's not as good. Our sensors, we change the batteries every year in some, so it's nice. How do you do user interface design? How do you interact with people? It's a big deal. Our systems, the smart home stuff, we install it, and we leave it, and we walk away. There's no interacting. So the training is, don't take it off the walls. And that's done. But also the cost, it's in harm's way, they get broken, they get lost. And a lot of the sensors in them are actually pretty low quality because it's all about a race to the bottom in this market. So yes, there's a magnetometer, but it'll have a high bias, it'll have a low sampling rate, it'll have a high error rate, there'll be noise. You have to be aware of that. Wearables are good. They tell you about physical motion, they give you good fidelity, they're mobile, they go with the person, they're cool, right? Everyone thinks they're cool, which is why I whacked out socially odd. When I first made this slide about 2.5, 3 years ago, it was socially odd to be wearing Fitbits and smartwatches and everything. It was a new thing still. Well, not anymore. At this point, when you walk around downtown and look at people's wrists, the number of people with some kind of smartwatch is really high, especially in this town. And so it's not socially odd anymore to be measuring yourself and pulling that data in. But there's still questions about getting the data out via what network you're going to use, how comfortable is it, how big is it, deriving context. There's some crazy approaches out there for kinds of things. Sometimes you'll run into some nutty stuff. For example, pills that emit RF signals when they dissolve so that you know that the person took the pill. It's kind of extreme, but there's a market for it, and the FDA approved it. It's under trial. So, coming to a Rite Aid near you. But there's also things like detecting swallowing, this band around the neck, telling if someone's actually eating and swallowing and what they're eating and swallowing based on the transducer. Those are some fun papers to review. Dr. G across the hallway has been doing a bunch of work with that too, on-body worn sensors to detect eating. So there's a lot of solutions, and there's a lot of available options out there. But you have to remember, there's a whole field of theory under this. What is a sensor really doing? It's sampling. It's telling you about the universe. What are all the possible errors that can go in there? Is it really telling you what you think it's telling you, and is it in the right context to be telling you that? You have to make sure all of this is in alignment before you can use that data. What kind of models can you build based on it? What can you know about the world at a given time? How good is that model? That's all part of what we're trying to build, because then we want to drive that model forward. Not only know what's happening now, but what could likely happen in the future. And then what are the available choices? There's a huge range of options. And just knowing that they're there and keeping up on some choices It's a real big part of what you're going to be as researchers, because that's going to drive what is available to you. And then where do you put them and why? You can't just throw it in the room and hope for the best. Some of them are like that, but most of them are not. Most of them you need to say, where are you going to put it, why, and what will that tell you, and how well will it tell you that? So, questions? I know this was a fast, high-density talk. This kind of talk I've actually done in multiple pieces before, because there is quite a bit of material here. But I'm hoping that it's at least put it in your heads that this isn't as simple as it looks. You don't just grab a sensor and use it. You gotta know what you're doing, at which point you will come up with a better, more accurate data set and be able to drive higher quality models.